graduated from college a couple of years ago. During my first year at college, I lived on campus in a dorm building. I was able to walk to all my classes and back because of this. The floor of my dorm that I lived on was the third floor of the building. I remember that after one of my first days of class, I was in bed by probably 11 p.m. I had the whole dorm room to myself and fell asleep pretty quickly. I woke up sometime in the night, though, to a knock on my door. I was so tired, and I could see it was still dark out. After rubbing my eyes, I looked at the clock to see that it was 3 a.m. There was once again another set of knocks on my door. I couldn't imagine why anybody would be knocking on my door at this hour, and I did not want to answer it. Eventually, it stopped, but then I heard another noise. It sounded like a man laughing. I could just barely hear it, but that's what it seemed to be. And not a younger man, but a sort of older-sounding man. Finally, it sounded like whoever was there walked away because I heard footsteps moving in the other direction and no longer heard the laughing. I wasn't sleepy anymore, and I decided to get out of bed and peek out of the keyhole. When I did, I didn't see anybody there, so I opened the door quietly and looked down the hallway. At the very end, I saw what appeared to be a man walking at the end of the hallway towards the stairs. He looked much older than college age. I quickly got in and closed the door again as soon as I saw him. After that, I made sure my door was locked and went back to bed. The next day was another normal day of classes for me. I had a night class on that particular day, which I wasn't too thrilled about, but it was a class that I needed, and it was only available at night. The class went from 7 to 8:30 p.m., and I walked there that night. There were only about 15 other kids or so in the class, and I sat at a desk in the back of the room and got out my laptop to take notes. I happened to be the only person in the back 2 rows of desks in that classroom. As I was taking notes on my laptop and listening to the professor, I happened to look over to the back door of the classroom. The door was just a little bit behind where I was sitting, and as I looked over to it, I noticed there was someone looking in. I saw the face of that same older guy pressed against the glass of the door, and he was looking directly at me with a really creepy-looking smile. He kept looking at me for a good 5 seconds or so before suddenly ducking down. After that, I looked back over to the window of the door several more times, but thankfully, he didn't come back. When class ended, I packed up my laptop and began walking back to my dorm. It was maybe a 10-minute walk across the campus. By now, it was dark out, and the campus was pretty quiet. As I walked back on the sidewalk, it didn't take long before I heard footsteps behind me, but I didn't feel the need to look back until they started getting closer and closer. I knew I wasn't walking that slow, so I turned back. When I did, I saw the same guy who I had seen when I was in class. The guy was looking at me, and when I saw him, he began to smile again, and then started to laugh. I recognized his laugh. This had to be the same guy who was knocking on my door in the middle of the night. I started walking faster, but the man began to run. I then started running to try to get away from him. I ran off from the sidewalk and into the road. The man followed. This road was quiet at this time of night, but in the distance, I could see a campus safety vehicle. It was parked on the side of the road, and I ran directly towards it. As I got closer, it noticed me. This is when the man seemed to notice too, and he stopped chasing me, and instead started running in another direction. When I reached the campus safety car, I told the officer what was going on. The man had pretty much gotten away by then, but the officer radioed to the police as well as the other campus safety officers. I went back to my dorm after that. I was pretty scared for a few days, but luckily never saw the guy again. A few years ago when I was in college, I did quite a bit of studying. I took school very seriously and needed to spend extra time on certain subjects. Sometimes I would go to study halls and work on assignments late into the night so that I could just focus better there. Now I went to a pretty large university. The campus was big, and there were a lot of different buildings. So while studying late in the halls or classrooms, I used to get scared due to the dark and quietness. But nothing really happened until that night when things got worse. I would sometimes see other people working on things late, but most of the time I was alone. On that Friday night, I went to one of the study halls where I had classes to get work done. With it being a weekend, there were not as many people around campus at night. And after 8 p.m., when I was in the building, I didn't see anybody else at all beside me. I found an empty classroom and then went inside. I sat down at a table, took out my laptop and notes, and began working. This went on for several hours. I would often lose track of time when I was working hard. I remember at one point I heard a thud outside the classroom, and then I heard a door open and shut off in the distance, which I thought might be the guard or some cleaner. I kept on hearing muffled thuds in the distance that were getting closer, but I didn't give it much thought. As I kept working, I soon heard footsteps approaching my classroom. I could see the front door to the classroom with a small window in it. I looked over and saw somebody appear in the window. It was a guy who I didn't recognize. He looked in, and then suddenly moved away out of sight. I figured he was looking for a classroom that was empty to study or work in. I went back to what I was doing. After that, probably about a minute or two later, I looked at the door again, and I was shocked to see that he appeared at the door again, and he pressed his face against the glass window at the door, weirdly looking at me. Then the classroom door opened up, and the same guy entered the class and stood still at the door. I watched him enter the room, but then looked back to my laptop. I was kind of annoyed that this guy was coming in here. Most of the classrooms in this building were about the same. He could have gone to any other one, but he was going to the one that I was in. I thought he might need to work as well, so I just ignored him. I tried to focus on my work after that, but everything took a tragic turn when I realized that I didn't hear anything after that man entered. I glanced back up, and there was no one in the class. Everything went quiet for some time, and then I heard a weird sound from one corner of the classroom. I was sitting so I couldn't see what was making that noise and thought it might be a mouse. But my curiosity got the best of me, and when I stood up to see, I nearly fell from fear when I saw that the man was sitting at the corner of the classroom, facing the wall, with his head continuously tapping on the wall. He was muttering something strange that I couldn't understand. As I fell on the chair, the man turned around and glanced over at me furiously, but I couldn't tell what he was doing. It was creeping me out because he was just sitting there. He didn't say anything at all either, and kept on staring at me. I decided that I would just leave. I packed up my laptop and notes, and then got up. The guy stood up and started walking towards me at a high speed. He pushed all the chairs and bench, kept on advancing towards me, and made a very creepy sound as if growling. Now I was able to see his face, and he was very scary to look at. His face had lots of wrinkles. He was about 40 to 35 years old, had a grown beard, and his eyes were shining and seemed red as if he had blood in his eyes. He was advancing towards me and was really close when I dodged him and ran towards the door. Then I just ran out of the classroom. I didn't know what to make of his weird behavior. I just wanted to get somewhere safer where I could save myself from that creepy guy who nearly killed me. As I ran in the hallway, I could hear him running just behind me, and I cannot forget the way he was growling with anger. But luckily, I outran him and got to the guard outside the building. I told them everything, and they searched the building thoroughly, but couldn't find anyone or any sign of intrusion. As I walked back home, I was about to take the last turn into the street of my home, when I felt as if someone was following me. I didn't look back and started running as fast as I could to get into the house. I was screaming when I got near the door, and my dad came outside to see what happened. As both of us stood there at the door, both of us saw that same man standing around the corner of the street, half behind the wall, looking at us with his head slightly down. Then he disappeared behind the wall and was never seen ever again. Dad informed police about it as well, but that man was never seen or heard of ever again. To this day, I cannot figure out where he came from, what he wanted, and where he went. After that incident, I didn't study in that building late at night again. It was a Monday morning, and everyone was tired and couldn't pay attention to the lecture. And the main reason for that was that it was the last day before spring break, so everyone's focus was on the break. All of a sudden, everyone jumped on their seats when the lockdown alarm went off. And immediately after that, the principal's voice came over the speakers. He explained that it was not a drill. Everyone's mood and expressions changed, and I could feel the shift of emotions in the room, from happiness to fear. I did what I was supposed to do. I showed the kids of my class to the corner of the room, turned off the lights, closed the blinds, and locked the door. It was the first time lockdown had happened at our college for real. I told the kids to be quiet, and that this was serious. I told them that we couldn't fool around, and they all understood. Not one of the kids made a sound. All of a sudden, I could hear banging on the lockers and doors in the hallway, coming from farther down. The bang got closer and closer to the classroom until it was right outside the door. I began to panic. I didn't want to believe what was happening was even real. Everyone's life was in danger, and I was in charge of the health and safety of those kids in my classroom. Whoever was outside started to bang on the door and began to yell, I told him to go away, and that's when he began to try the door handle. When the handle wouldn't budge, the man became very angry and started to yell, banging the door, kicking the door, grabbing the door, and doing anything to get into the classroom. I grabbed a book that was next to me and a pair of scissors in case the man managed to get through. I thought I would at least have a better chance with these. I felt helpless, and the fate of everyone in the classroom was in the hands of that door. He was kicking the door real hard, and I thought it was about to give out any second. We made sure to barricade the door with all the desks in the classroom, so that gave us an extra layer of security. The man outside was throwing his entire body into the door to get it open. With every hit, I could feel the gates of life closing slower and slower. All of a sudden, a violent attempt to break the door open banged against it, and the desks holding the door began to tremble. When I looked at the door, I saw that its lock was broken, and the man had enough space to get his arm inside, through the door. I, along with a few other students, tried to keep him out. While doing it, I saw his face. He was trying to get his head inside the classroom through the slightly open door. His head was all bloody, as if he was banging on the door with his head. His eyes were popping out with anger, and he had really creepy expressions all over his face. He was looking right at me and banging his head violently against the door. Desks and a few of us were the only things holding him outside the class. Just when I thought he was going to jump in, the man stopped. I heard another voice from behind him telling him to leave it, and they had to go. After that, he stopped and stood there for some time looking at us all through the slightly open door. And then as he disappeared from my view, I heard 2 pairs of footsteps run down the hallway, down the stairs, and out one of the college doors. I couldn't describe the relief I felt. I was so thankful that the door didn't give in. They never ended up catching the guys who came to our college that day, and nobody knew what their real intentions were. The college timings were cut short that day, and everyone ended up going home. I heard from a few people that the guys got into the college pretending to be parents of a student. That's when one of the people at the front desk noticed that a man had a knife in his pocket when they were walking away. That's when a lockdown was called, and the men began to run around the college, trying to get into any room they could. No one was injured during the lockdown, and I think the main reason was that the police were able to respond in just over 7 minutes. Unfortunately, they were too late to catch them because the sound of the sirens scared them off. From there on forward, we've had more strict security at the college to ensure nothing like this will ever happen again. I just get a little uneasy sometimes when I'm at that college, knowing that I could have been killed right there.